Thank you for the introduction. So before I begin, I just would like to quickly tell you the mission of my organization, because it's all about repurposing. We take surplus goods from US-based corporations and provide them to organizations providing services to orphans and vulnerable children in developing countries, particularly in Malawi, Haiti, and Liberia. So we are all about repurposing, and that's actually our mission. But today, I'd like to talk to you about my 5-step guide to international development. And it's something that I've developed over the last 7 years of working in this field, really to show me the way and keep me on the path. And it's not only the 5-step guide to the progression of myself in this field, but also of my organization, Goods for Good, but also of the larger field of development. With these 5 steps, I believe we all need to move in this direction. So to jump right in, the first step is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you don't try, you don't learn. So I got started basically by falling into this field. I worked at the United Nations out of undergrad, and I had the opportunity to travel to Malawi in '03. And I was very excited at the opportunity, but growing up in suburban New Jersey, we talked a little bit about the suburbs earlier today, I was terrified to confront those images of poverty I had only seen on the TV and in magazines growing up. And so as I prepared for that trip, I said, I can't go empty-handed. I knew I would be visiting an orphanage, 600 children living at this one orphanage without any basic necessities. So I spoke to them, I said, what can I do? And they said, well, any basic materials, clothing, educational materials, health and hygiene products that you can bring, we would greatly appreciate. And so I said, okay, let's see what I can do. I made 2 phone calls to the Children's Place and Toys R Us, and I said, hey, do you guys have anything laying around? Well, they did, and from those 2 phone calls, I got 2 tons of surplus, unused, all new goods to deliver to this orphanage. And so you can imagine when I got to Malawi, I was actually with my boss from the UN, and we were greeted by 600 smiling children, many of whom were wearing their first new outfit in their entire lives. I said, okay, well, no matter where my life takes me, I gotta keep doing this every year. And little did I know that my colleagues at the UN had already devised a plan for me. I got back and they said, hey, Melissa, can you help with Pakistan earthquake relief? This was some colleagues at the UNDP. And I said again, well, let's see what I can do. I don't know. And I made a phone call and we got thousands of articles of warm winter clothing that, again, was new and unused and going to waste. We delivered those goods to Pakistan. We helped a lot of children who lost their homes in the earthquake. A few months later, Liberian colleagues asked me, Melissa, the schools are reopening after 14 years of civil war. They've all been looted. We don't have a pen. We don't have a chalk. We don't have anything. Can you help us? Again, I was like, well, let's see what I can do. And within 2 months, I was able to rescue over 410,000 pens and 400,000 notepads from pharmaceutical surplus marketing materials that were slated to be destroyed. We delivered 77 tons of school supplies to Liberia, and we were able to reach 80% of the school-age population with some junk that was going to be thrown away here in the United States. And so, looking back now, a few years out, there's a bunch of things I would change about these projects. They were far from perfect. The Liberia project, there was only 1 tugboat working in the country at the time. It took a few months to get that tugboat to bring our goods to shore, but we helped 500,000 children. I helped 500,000 children in those 3 years. So it wasn't perfect, but we did it, and we helped a lot of kids. But not only that, beyond helping those children, I learned a lot. I learned what worked, I learned what didn't work, and I ultimately founded Goods for Good as a result of those first few projects. So in the spirit of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, but still striving for perfection, because that's pretty important, I'd like to bring you to my next point, which is don't assume that your client's needs are the same as your own. In any work, whether it's in Africa or in America, wherever you're working, you need to go, you need to spend time with your clients, you need to understand what they need, not what you think they need. And by doing that, you're truly able to maximize your impact and mitigate harm. So what do I mean by that? Take me, for example. I knew after those few projects, there were millions of tons of excess goods, at least in the United States and in the world. I also knew that there were 1 million plus orphans and vulnerable children in Malawi who were lacking basic materials. What I didn't know at the beginning was how to link those two together. So what did I do? I picked up, actually my husband was kind enough to come along with me, and we bought a $1,700 truck. It worked pretty well for $1,700, and we traipsed around Malawi for 7 months, meeting with high government officials all the way down to communities. And what we found was where our goods belonged. Let me tell you a little bit about what we tapped into. We went beyond the NGOs located in the capitals of a lot of countries like Malawi. We went deep into the village and we found a vast network of community-based organizations, organizations founded by Malawians for Malawians in their village, dealing locally with the problems that many people in the country were facing. And the types of services that these community-based organizations provide are nursery school programs. Here in this slide you see a circle morning activity. They also provide after-school programs for orphans, OAU, Orphan Affairs Unit. You can see she proudly dons her Orphan Affairs Unit uniform. And these are local services for local people run by local people. But the real problem was that the caregivers and the leaders of these organizations were oftentimes as poor, sometimes even poorer than the very kids they were trying to help. So that's where our goods could be maximizing impact and mitigate harm. So we found where our goods belonged, the location. But now onto the question of what goods should we provide? We're definitely not going to be providing color TVs, although let's say they wouldn't mind that necessarily. But what were the basic goods? So we sat with children like Selena, who herself is an orphan. And what we understood was that kids were desperate, for example, for school uniforms. In fact, in his recent book, Nicholas Kristof in Half the Sky talks about the correlation between availability of school uniforms and school attendance. And without it, you see kids dropping out because they don't have a dress. So that seems pretty easy to solve. But beyond needing a school uniform, we also saw that we had already lost a whole group of children. They had already dropped out of school. What could they do to help themselves? So we said, let's do this. Let's bring fabric to Malawi, not school uniforms. Let's get fabric, and let's deliver it to these community-based organizations and train older orphans in the vocational skill of tailoring to make school uniforms for younger children. I came back to America. I was able to access, with 3 phone calls, 30,000 yards of surplus fabric that was going to be disposed of by the clothing manufacturers here. We delivered it to our CBOs, and in 1 year, our CBOs, our community-based organizations, made 22,000 new school uniforms for their children. All they needed was the fabric. And so today, by understanding what the needs are, we're able to support 187 local community organizations and 54,000 children. But by basing our needs on what we see on the ground, we also need to continue to base how we measure success on what we see on the ground, which leads me to my 3rd step, which is don't measure success with the same yardstick. So what does that mean? That means here, for most of us, literacy was a given, right? It wasn't a success. We were all going to become literate. The question was doctors, lawyers, what were we going to be? But in Malawi, what we're talking about is a 50% dropout rate of school by the 4th grade, 28% of which is because of a lack of basic materials. So literacy in Malawi is not a given. And it was something that we needed to strive for as a success for us. What you see in Malawi is a severe lack of basic necessities, kids really holding on to whatever little bit that they have. You also see teachers teaching up to 90 students per class. I know I taught standard 7th grade English in Malawi. I had 85 students. Similarly, they're teaching 90 students per class without a roof, with little more than a piece of chalk. And so when we look at success, we need to look first at literacy and keeping kids in school. And there was a study a few years ago out of the University of Indiana and Harvard that said with every additional year a girl stays in school, she has 0.26 fewer children. So the impact of getting an education is huge. And so as we, Goods for Good, focus on education as a main indicator of success, we've had a few successes along the way. One I'd like to tell you about quickly is by providing 2 pens per student per term across all of our organizations, we've seen a 30% increase in attendance. Today, Goods for Good has rescued over 2.5 million pens from being disposed of and delivered them to these children. Similarly, with surplus soap, we've been able to get rid of foodborne digestive tract diseases at all of our nursery schools. And not only are the kids healthier, parents and caregivers, because many of these children are orphans, are now sending their kids more happily and more freely to these schools because they see them as a healthy place to be. So we see increased enrollment from a simple hand washing program. You know a little bit about our vocational training tailoring program. We've provided 22,000 new school uniforms. Not only do we see an increase in attendance, but a huge improvement in self-esteem. But beyond supporting the children, we also need to support the caregivers and the teachers, because those are ultimately the people who are making the impact. I have 5 full-time staff members at Goods for Good, but I have thousands of teachers and caregivers like this one that I rely on to do the hard labor. And we need to support them, not just the children they're trying to help. So we provide basic school materials in the form of surplus goods and other materials to teachers as well. And so as we look at our successes, I'm proud and I feel great about it, but what I also recognize is that poverty is complex, and that Goods for Good, an organization that's focused on taking surplus goods and providing them to orphans and vulnerable children, can't possibly meet all the needs of these children. There's health issues, there's nutritional issues, there's psychological issues. And so as we talk about expanding the breadth of our success, how can we do that? Leads me to my 4th point. Partnership is paramount to success. Partnership, partnership, partnership. I always tell people when I meet with them that I look at Goods for Good as one piece of the larger development pie. I rely on a lot of other organizations to make things work. But that being said, when I spent those 7 months in my $1,700 truck traipsing all over Malawi, I saw that nobody knew what anybody was doing, from the highest government offices to those large NGOs to the communities on the ground. There was a severe lack of knowledge. And who suffered ultimately from that? It was the children. And so when I entered into this field, I first and foremost was interested, I'll be honest, in partnership because I didn't have the resources to reach all those community-based organizations. They're based out in the rural areas and they're hard to get to. So I needed partnership for other people's trucks, other people's people, and other people's knowledge. But when I started forming these partnerships, what I realized that I got so much more. I got to vastly increase my breadth of success by partnering with organizations that, for example, do health infrastructure, toilets, hand washing stations. I could both address the sanitary needs of my children, of our beneficiaries, as well as the material needs. So let me tell you a little bit about one partnership. It was the first partnership we ever had. It was with an organization called AfriCare. AfriCare was building latrines at 20 public schools across rural Malawi. I went to them, I found out that they were working locally, they had community members building the latrines, they had 1,000 students in schools without a toilet. So this is the type of standard we were talking about. I met with them and I said, hey, you guys are working in 20 rural public schools, what are you doing? We're building toilets. Well, are there any other needs that you see in these schools? And they kind of hung their head low in frustration and said, they're desperate for materials, but we can't do it. I said, well, here I am, and I'm ready to do it. And so AfriCare and Goods for Good partnered up. AfriCare brought the health infrastructure, the latrines, and the hand washing stations, and Goods for Good brought the goods. And together, we've seen a complete transformation at all of these schools. We still need more partnerships. We're looking for more, but nonetheless, together, we over doubled, tripled, quadrupled, I would argue, our impact without actually putting any more resources into it. So the issue of partnership is paramount, but it's hard. In Africa, communication is hard. And in fact, again, to talk about Nicholas Kristof's new book, he talks about partnership and the need for partnership in development. And in describing one health center, he says, to quote, "Somehow, improbably, it all comes together." What I don't understand is why in this day and age, where we can do most everything at the click of a button, does partnership in the nonprofit sector have to be improbable? If nonprofits could find a place where we could easily share knowledge and leverage resources, we could expand our definition and breadth and impact and all of our successes immensely without really much more input. So what am I talking about here? This is my vision, and this is where I see myself going and Goods for Good going, and hopefully the nonprofit sector going. So let's just dial back a second. I talked a little about when I started. I got a car, I was traipsing around the streets of Malawi, and there was a lot of sweaty, long days. What if, instead of having to pick up and do that from the onset, there was a website? There was a website where you could see all of the nonprofits in the world. And let's say here I am, 6 years ago, I'm interested in Africa. Click on Africa. I see the nonprofits in Africa. Within Africa, I'm interested in Malawi. Within Malawi, I'm interested in Dowa District, for example. We have many, many projects there. 150 of our projects are actually in Dowa District. So I click on Dowa District. Within Dowa District, I'm interested in nonprofits working in education, right? It took me a long time to figure out who was working in education, but with this website, I click on education, and there are 3 organizations working in Africa, in Malawi, in Dowa District, in education. Let's say, for example, I want to know what Africare is doing. That improbable partnership that I was able to form somehow is now just a click away. Oh, Africare. Africare has many current projects in Dowa District, and they're looking for partnership in the following things. And so, as we look to the future of the nonprofit sector, and as we're innovating and there's new creative ideas, we need to find a place to share those ideas, to come together and to build partnerships for success, to share knowledge, to leverage resources, and to ultimately improve the situation in the developing world and in our world altogether. Before I conclude, I'd just like to be clear that you can't replace spending time with your clients. You still need to go, you need to sit, you need to have some teas, you need to have a good chat. But if I could have started here and then gone there, I think I would be a few steps ahead of where I am now. So with this, I'd just like to conclude. The idea and the vision is nonprofiteer.org, and it's a website that we're now trying to develop to bring these things to reality, to make partnerships probable and not improbable. So stay tuned, and thank you very much.